Hey everyone, we're happy you could join us for today's session, Automating Accessibility Tests, Web is for Everyone, with guest speaker Manoj Kumar. But before he starts his talk, I'd like to say a few words about our distinguished speaker. Manoj is a senior test automation consultant. He has over 7 years of experience using Selenium and has architected many automated testing solutions using tools in the Selenium ecosystem for both web and mobile apps. He's an open source enthusiast and has contributed to different libraries such as Selenium, NG WebDriver, Serenity, and Protractor. He is also the author of the Selenium blog, Assert Selenium. In addition, Manoj is one of the organizers of Selenium Conf. He's a member of the Selenium core team, and he's a popular speaker at leading global test automation conferences. So without any further ado, Manoj, the stage is yours.
Hey, thanks, Addy. Thanks for the introduction. With that, hi everybody. I welcome one and all who joined the call, and hi to people who are not able to join the call but will be hearing the recording of this webinar. Special hi to you people as well. So today's topic is going to be automating accessibility checks. A little introduction about me. I think Addy gave a brief introduction. So yes, I'm an open source enthusiast, and also I'm one of the steering committee members of the Selenium project, and I organize the Selenium conference. And I also blog on Selenium at assertselenium.com, and you can send in the tweets at the rate of Manoj9788. And if you're interested, you can connect with me on LinkedIn on the name Manoj Kumar 9788. And of course, yes, I'm accessibility enthusiast, and that's the reason why we are here, sharing my knowledge on accessibility, how we can implement. With that, let's get started. So here is a list of topics that to be covered today. So I know accessibility is something a hot topic in the market, where everybody wants to learn about accessibility and how can you implement in your organization and within your projects, and do you need extra efforts to implement accessibility on your existing workflow, or will you need separate efforts and all that? So it's going to be an introduction part. So it's called the accessibility primer. So a primer on accessibility, all you need to know about accessibility basics, the what and why of accessibility, some overview of the accessibility standards, and how and whens of testing of accessibility, and some tips to implement in your organization, and then A11Y in action, and then A11Y TAAS. So first of all, A11Y. So if you count each character of accessibility, it's total 11 digits between A and Y. So it was mainly given a short name to communicate easily on Twitter. So that hence the name A11Y. So wherever you see the word A11Y on my slide, so it's completely referring to accessibility. All right, with no further ado, let's get started with the actual topic. So I always start with some numbers and facts to prove the topic that we're going to talk is worth. And about 20% of the world's population live with some form of disability, which is about 1 million people. And so it's quite nice to be developing apps which are accessible for them as well, and that's the whole objective of the webinar. And what is accessibility? So accessibility testing is all about testing an application whether it is usable by people with disabilities. It's actually not with disabilities, but it's nice to say people for everyone, right? So accessibility is about enabling people. And disability only exists if we don't provide them ways to include them in our day-to-day life. And people have impairments, not disabilities, right? So let's not discriminate them by saying disability. So a nice way to describe them is impairments. So let's see some examples of who we're talking about and how these impairments and disability is considered in the real life environment, right? So an example here, you can see a man in a wheelchair, and A man who's fine, healthy, is climbing up the stairs, but a man on the wheelchair is not able to go, right? So it's not his fault. And over here, he's a funny guy, right? Should be crazy when doing this. He has a pedestrian and a slope path for the people on the wheelchair, but there's a divider in between. I'm not sure how the people with wheelchair would go past that. And this is even more funnier, where there's a ramp for the people on wheelchair, but how he would get through the last two steps. And this is a beautiful example, right, to showcase accessibility. So this is actually called STRAMs, right? Steps and ramps, where people who are disabled can go through on the wheelchair through the ramps, and people who are healthy, they can go through the steps. And so these are the examples in the real life world where people are discriminated by not giving ways. So what I'm trying to say is, so disability doesn't exist. So it's just that we are not giving them a proper way to include them in our proper lifestyle. Accessibility is not about physical condition. It's about limited human interaction. So we've given a brief about accessibility and who are those people and what challenges they do face in the society. So now, what does it do with the apps? So being an IT professional, developing apps and products in the software world, in this digital, online, and everything. So what does it do with the apps? So that's the question. So just to correlate with the examples that we discussed, right? So if you're developing an app and that isn't accessible, you're creating barriers and making your impairment disability, which is perfectly in line with what the examples that we saw before. And that's where Heben Grimer, so she mentioned this: disability never holds anyone back. Disability is not something that people need to overcome. The barriers that exist are created by society, right? So let's not be cruel to those people. 20% of the population is huge, and 1 billion people. So let's try to find ways to include them in the way that we do. Now, if you're still not convinced with bringing in accessibility to those people, coming into a pure technological and business scenarios, why we need accessibility testing? Because better business, so if you build an app that's accessible and user-friendly, you can cater to those 20% population. Yes, 20% population is not something that you can miss out, because users have different needs, as you see in the picture. And search engine optimization, right? So that's where every people, right, they go crazy about bringing their application to be shown on Google's first page or second page when they search the keyword is done. So you don't have to spend a lot on SEOs, but make sure your apps are accessible, and automatically it leads the way to a positive search engine optimization. So it's like a dual purpose. So accessible websites yield a good SEO, which ultimately leads to using usage of heading tags and giving a meaningful contextual links and making sure there's no text on images. It's a bad practice. Next, and also, of course, we don't want to get sued by people, right? So to prove that, yes, we need to abide by legal legislation. So there are different acts around the world. So there's ADA National Network in the US, which says the applications needs to be accessible. And Disability Discrimination Act 1992 in Australia says it needs to develop web applications that are accessible. The same with the UK, and also in Europa websites. So in January 2010, it mandated that the web content should be accessible as per the WCAG. So we are going to discuss that in later slides. So it's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Next, we're talking about why we need accessibility testing, and so those are some good reasons, right? But talking about those standards which we are saying about when discussing about the Europa regions, about the WCAG, so it's a Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So these are the accessibility standards that define, okay, if you're developing web applications and if you're trying to make that accessible, here are the standards that you need to abide by. So those are none other than the WCAG 2.0 and GSA Section 508. So the GSA Section 508 is majorly followed in the United States as per the Federal Act published in December 2000. And also the WCAG. So WCAG has seen a different working drafts, like we have the Selenium draft. So WCAG 1.0 was on May 1999, which was superseded by the WCAG 2.0 on December 2008. So the main objective of creating the draft was to make sure you develop a testable and a technology agnostic applications. And there's also going to be WCAG 2.1, which is still in working draft, going to be published sooner, where the main objective are things like, provide an accessible way to see the low vision people access webs, and also some of the graphics. And of course, the accessible mobile devices, because it's the digital world and everything is on the go. So it makes sense to abide by the WCAG contents. And now moving on to the success criteria. So there are some standards we know that we need to follow, but is there a success criteria that needs to be measured? Yes, of course they are. So there are 3 levels: level A, level AA, and level AAA. So say you're developing web applications and you want to follow the WCAG 2.0 rule, and level AA is where most people try to reach the level of being accessible. So if you see what that means in a more simplistic manner, so it's all about level A is all about basic web accessibility features, and level AA is about tackling the most common barriers for the disabled users. And level AAA is the highest level of web accessibility. In my experience so far, I haven't seen websites, those are all AAA. And you can also refer the link here. I'm sure the slides will be shared later, and you can always refer to the pages. And so this link here will have all the technical way of defining those standards. Now, this is a neat mind map that was grabbed from the Stanford, where you can see the WCAG 2.0 is mainly divided into 4 sections on the blue dots, if you see. So it's perceivable. So the information and the user interface components should be presentable to users in a way that they can perceive. So which is nothing but you need to be developing an applications that more perceivable and operable, which is of course, so it's not enough to have a bright shiny UI, but if it's not accessible, then there's no use in developing that, right? And understandable and also robust. So those are the main principles, and you can have a look later on. So each of those blue dots is subdivided into the orange ones, and all those will have A, AA, and AAA standards. So this is quite nice mind to refer. And abilities and declines. So we saw some examples, and those quite go well with the real world scenarios, right? But who are the users that we're talking about here? So it's exactly people who are with visual impairments, auditory impairments, mobility impairments, and cognitive impairments. So which means that, to elaborate more, so say for example, if you're taking the visual impairments, so there could be people who are blind, they could be low vision, they could be colorblind, and how would they access web applications? We will see that in later slides, but these are things that need to be considered when we say that we are going to target those 20% and being nice to all those people, right? And these impairments are those 20% who are known to be permanent. But what happened to the future? So you need to be always ready, right, for the future. So this is a beautiful representation from Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit, where it says about, don't just think only about the 20% population, but also ready for the future, where you yourself can be in a situational impairment of getting injured with one arm, with just access to one arm, or being a new parent just like me, having a baby in a hand, and stuff like that, right? So which can get worse in the future, but you got to make sure to develop for the future and be ready. And ARIA attributes. So this is going to be, so we saw about the definition of accessibility, why do we do that, and some of the standards and some success criteria to measure, and also the abilities in decline people, right? So those people, so we are trying to find a ways to make the applications accessible and developing web applications, right? So how do we do that? So it's all about ARIA attributes that we're going to talk, and ARIA is a set of attributes that you can add to the HTML elements on the web pages. So these attributes communicate role, state, and property semantics to assistive technologies via the accessibility APIs implemented in the browsers. So that is how the ARIA attributes that you're going to inject onto your normal HTML DOM is going to help those assistive devices convey the text in a meaningful way to the people who can't access the apps in a normal way, just like we do, right? So that's the overall view or a primer about what's accessibility, those standards, and where we are going to. And given that these are the attributes that are going to be injected on HTML elements, and we as a testers also have the responsibility to test that, right? So let's try to jump onto the testing aspects of accessibility. So let's start with manual testing. So I know it's quite nice to say manual testing, but functional testing. So I've just split it in two ways, showing the ways that you can do manually the accessibility testing, as well as things, the way that you can do in automated fashion, right? So starting with the functional manual way of doing, so just a disclaimer, friendly disclaimer stating that there is no substitute for the real user feedback. And it's advisable and important to include people with disabilities to test your applications. So what you can do, so the next few slides are going to be tips for you to straight away jump onto doing some accessibility testing, which is also one of the key takeaways for the webinar. And let's go. So the first one, what you can do for the manual accessibility testing. So tap through a page with keyboard, unplug your mouse keyboards, sorry, with your mouse and trackpads, and try to only tab through. So let's see an example of SSA.gov, how it performs, right? So here it is. So I'm going to use only tab. I hope everyone can see this. So turn accessibility mode on, so which means that SSA.gov has worked nicely on their accessibility. So straight skip to the content. And you can see it's a nice sequential way of accessing the web applications. This is how you do, and you can also think of ways doing the tab focused keyboards on your normal applications, right? You might know the functional workflow of your applications. You might have just used the mouse to click in a faster way of testing, but just try to do the tabbing functions. And let's also see the Delta website, right? So I quite like the accessibility that these guys have worked on. So just loaded the URL. And okay, so when I do the first tab, it shows skip to main content, which also the SSA.gov showed. But the quite interesting thing is, when you do the next tab, it shows skip to flight search, which means that the people who are using keyboards can easily skip into the flight search, which is what we wanted, and that's the main objective of moving into this site. And when you do the next tab, you have flight status, you have my trips, and all that, and also skip to check-in. So if you don't want to do all these, you can keep on tabbing and go through and see how accessible the website is. And this is also one of the key important factors in making your applications accessible with the focus management, right? Cool, so this one thing, we have seen this. Next, use screen readers for testing. So screen readers use heading structures to get the overall understanding of the page. And so these are all some of the underlying technologies that you can use, like JAWS, NVDA in Windows, VoiceOver on Mac. and TalkBack on Android, iOS on Speak Screen, blah, blah, blah. You can use that. And I'm not showing you how to do the screen reader now, but if you're on a Mac, you can do a Command F5 to bring up the voiceover and open your functional applications or your application under test to see, do the tabs and see it reads what you actually, the focus is on. Right? Say, for example, you have an application which has a login username and password. So your focus is on the username field. So it should easily communicate through the voiceover that you're on the username field. So that is how the people with people who are blind will actually know, okay, I'm on username field and I need to type something. So that is how the screen readers works, right? And that's exactly what the ARIA attributes is going to help the screen readers in understanding through the accessibility tree. So we'll see what accessibility tree is all about. But so there's also a neat Firefox plugin that you can use, which help in checking the headings and semantics, so which you can download later and find. And also on the Chrome, you can just do Chrome:/accessibility, and it will have all the open tabs that's there, and you can click on the show accessibility tree and see how the tree looks like. And this is where exactly the screen readers will interpret how your applications looks like. And that is how the information is being passed on to the people who are blind. And also there's accessibility developer tools by Google that you can use and do accessibility audits. And these browser plugins will help you to find flaws in computer text and ARIA labels, and those roles, which is important, and also the form criteria, right? Now, also, so with the Firefox plugin that I mentioned, so this is how it looks. So it has a neat toolbar here where, say for example, if you want to disable images, right? So disable images on applitools.com and see whether the application will still be able to perceive without images, right? So conveying messages through images is one of the bad ways in terms of accessibility that we just saw in the SEO slide. It's still okay. Let's go a little more crazy in disabling the styles. So this is how it looks. It is still okay though. So that is how you use these plugins to help test for accessibility. Now, for the accessibility, so visually testing an application is also an important toolkit, where is a much needed way to check if your application is appearing correctly on different browser combinations and operating systems, on different viewport sizes, zoom in and zoom out, and disable images. And so I have some code demos that we see on later slides on how do you disable images, how do you disable CSS and drive your WebDriver test in a more automated fashion, which will be quite exciting to see. And so there's also some tools to do visual testing, as you know. So WebDriver CSS is open source, as you see, and there's also applitools, which is recommended tool in terms in the visual testing world, which I've used and seen a best effort. And also, one of the crazy things that I did on my previous project was to simulate a colorblind way of seeing the application and check your apps. So I'm not sure if many of you have tried that, but you can still do, and which is one of the nice features. And I'm hoping to see that in applitools, which will bring in a more native in the automation. So there is a application which will help you to do that. So if you go to toptal.com, so there is a colorblind web page filter. So you can type in a URL here and then pick a color filter over here. So there are different types of color blindness like protanopia, deuteranopia, tritanopia, and all that, and also the grayscale. So you can type in a URL here and check vision and impairment, what type of impairment, right? And then do a fetch and filter. So this is how it looks. So this is a United Airlines homepage. This is how it normally looks when people see. And so this is how the people with tritanopia impairment will perceive the information. So this is how you need to be careful about designing your applications in a more meaningful way and not use much of images to convey the meanings, and also use colors that are bringing in more meaningful way, right? So let's quickly go and do the protonopia way. Similarly, okay, the grayscale, it's good. So this is how you can try, being innovative with your day-to-day functional testing. I know you guys who do functional testing spend a lot of time in testing each and every parts of application. So things like this make your more innovative results, as well as you get more interest towards testing and all that. Now, moving on. So as I told, this accessibility testing is split into automated and manual fashion. So with manual, always we can include people with disabilities. So I've just termed it differently as differently able people. And also we can use accessibility plugins, and then you can use keyboard support, and then you can check for the text alternatives. So these are things that you can do in the manual way. But with automation, so you can check features like form labels are correct, and color contrast is good. And the example that we just saw for the colorblind simulation is one of the examples for color contrast. And check whether the language specification is right, and check whether the ARIA validation is good, and focus management and accessible names, right? So these are the different ways that we can test, and there is no proper tool yet. And as you know, one tool can't do all the things that you want. So with that saying, let's not expect the tool to do everything for us, and particularly with accessibility. So with that, let's move on to automating accessibility checks. So there's many people who claim that there's no automation tool that can do accessibility checks, and it gives a lot of false positives. Yes, it does, but if it's used in a proper way, then it's estimated that, based on my experience, as well as people in the world who are accessibility practitioners, so they say that accessibility tests which are automated using the tools that we're going to see in the later slides can roughly catch up to 30% of accessibility issues, depending on the audit rules that we have, which is quite nice, right? So that is something is better than nothing. Now, what tools would I need to use? So there's a lot of tools, as you see in the tools cloud. So these, which includes open source and also a couple of paid version of tools. So since we love open source and we love things that are free, we're going to see things that are free for us to use. All right, accessibility with integration test. Okay, so since we saw about how manually testing accessibility is more important with different ways by keyword navigation, tabs, and disabling images and all that. So with automation, of course, we know the testing pyramid, right? So there's unit testing level and there is integration testing level. And so the slides that you see now will be talking about integration test, which is where the automated test with WebDriver will come into picture. And also included some examples for the unit test where you can go and say to the developers to include those plugins and tools to their development workflow, and where we can stop right away some of the accessibility flaws. Let's go and see accessibility with WebDriver. So the reason for choosing WebDriver, so it's not that I'm a Selenium enthusiast and one of the core members of Selenium, but Selenium WebDriver is a W3C recommended tool for automating browsers, and which is also becoming a de facto tool for browser automation, which has a wide range of support for browsers with languages bindings. And WebDriver is a human-centric, user-friendly bot, is how I would term. Why? Because as you all may or may not know, WebDriver won't interact on elements that are hidden on the DOM, but can work only with elements that are visible to the human eye, right? So that is why in early ages of using Selenium RC, so if you're using a Selenium RC, then you would have seen there are ways to trigger an event like fire event APIs to inject forcefully some of the JavaScript functions and then do, of course, we have JavaScript executors in WebDriver, but this is something more native API that was exposed directly on RC. And WebDriver is not like that. And so by this, what I'm trying to say is you're already testing for accessibility because you're driving tests or testing elements that are only visible to the human eye, but which is not something computed on the DOM, which the users won't see. If the normal users won't see it, then it doesn't make sense to test them. And also when we consider about accessibility, bringing in a web application accessible for people who are blind, makes sense, right? Yeah, so how do we bring in WebDriver or integrate WebDriver for accessibility testing, which is one of the main questions that people ask in the forums. And I hope these tips and strategies will help you in bringing up. So there are certain use cases. Of course, there are many use cases that you can come up, and I would love to hear more about this. But these are some of the strategies that I implemented at my past project when we were successful with it. And what are all those? So drive tests with accessibility in mind. So think in an accessibility perspective. So for that, you need to know about accessibility a little bit, what we have seen now. So just make an extra effort in learning through what accessibility and what those standards are and what rules we have to keep in mind. So if you all keep in that mind, you would eventually come up with use cases like this. So run a WebDriver test with images and animations turned off that we saw on the manual testing. So you can do that in automated fashion as well. People might be doing that for making WebDriver execution faster, but there is also a neat advantage of testing for accessibility as well. And tab-only test for. So don't use directly the WebDriver elements to click on buttons and use send keys with direct selectors, but try to focus with a given selector, and from there, try to carry on the flow with just by using the actions class, by using either keys.tab or keys.down arrows and keys.up arrows and stuff like that to navigate and see whether you're able to do that. And also, if you're starting your application new and putting up an automation strategy, so which is also good to scope some of the functional tests that can navigate only on the user keyboard with using the tab functions. So we can see a slide demo on how this can be done. So it can be, so the code samples are here on the Google short link that you can refer to later when you have these slides. So here is a video recording that I want to show you. So I'm not running that test case right now, but we'll eventually get onto the IDE to see the tests. So it just goes to the go.uk and we just tab through each elements on there, and I'm just printing out what are all the tab that was just focused on, and it just went pretty fast, right? So let me play that again. Cool, you can see it just printed out. So I'm just using the getText API to print out what all the elements that were in focus, and just print out. And you can use this to validate against your usual flow. So to match, either you can put these in a hash map in a key value pairs, and then check like a hash table with hash table where you know the actual flow, what needs to be there on the tabs, and then you can check with the what are all the output that just got printed out on the console. So this is one example. And the next example here is the internet application, which is developed by Dave Heifner. So he's the author of Elemental Selenium, and he has this neat website to practice your automation tests. So here you can see a key process link here. So what it does is, so you click on that, And whatever action you do on the keyboard, it just prints it out there. Say, for example, you click on Shift, it prints Shift and Tab, and likewise. So let's try to automate that, right? So that's going to be a use case where you can scale that up to an actual functional flow. So just running a test, and it's opening the internet applications, and goes on a for loop and presses on key presses, and it says I've just printed a tab and then a shift, and then that's it. So it just ran and just printed out whatever it is there. So let's move on how these tests look like, right? So this is how it looks like. So what I'm doing here, so let's take the internet app where we pressed on key presses, and let me go on to the presentation mode. Okay, cool. Cool. What I'm doing here is instantiating an actions class, and then finding elements by a tag, and then using that in a for loop to iterate. What I want to do is I'm using the send keys, the keys.tab, and when the tab is actually happening, of course, we know that WebDriver is having a focus there, right? So we want to capture that. So there is an API that you can use to capture which element has the current focus. So you can use driver.switch to.activeElement and have that saved in a web element called activeElement, and then you can print it out. And when I see in that loop which matches key presses, all I'm doing is I want to click there. That is where it went to the key presses page. And sorry for using this thread.sleep here, but I just did it on purpose because to show it in a demo, otherwise it would just go pretty fast and you can't see there. And you can remove it when you actually use. And after that, I'm performing a tab, and then p-pound result will actually get the text to whatever is being done, the action performed. And then I'm giving a keys.shift. So this is how you can try to be more innovative with your WebDriver test to bring out accessibility. And this is the go.uk website, which we saw, where we again instantiate an actions class and get the elements. Those are all the links. And iterate in a for loop again to do a tab, and then get an active element saved on an active element web element, and then again do a get text so that you can print it out. So stuff like that you can try out. So these are all very pretty easy and straightforward use cases that you can try on a day-to-day workflow where you do WebDriver automation. So these might be a low-level test, right? So this is just an idea to scale it up to your actual functional flow. Say that you have an insurance application and you want to try for an home insurance code. So you know a full functional flow, and start with the first page, giving driver.find element so that the focus is there, and from there try to do keys.tab so that it goes to the next element, and then give a send keys there, and again use the arrow functions to do. And I also have some examples to do with the arrow keys that I will show a little bit later. And yeah, so stuff like that is what you can try with the WebDriver without using any plugins at all, right? And so as I mentioned earlier, so what you can do is, so given a web element, right? So you have a CSS selector. So this example is in JavaScript. So what you can do is have a selector. So just like menu 0 button. So chain actions, driver.find element, and then do keys.space to activate that element to do something which that element is supposed to do. And then you get the attribute ARIA expanded, and then making sure that it's true. So let's see that in an example. So I have an example here which is running on my local. So this is the eBay mine patterns. So this will, you can just let this know about to your developers. They can refer this. So these are all some nice set of accessibility compliant website, which has each controls and how it should look like. Say, for example, we have this menu button, right? So it has ungrouped items and then customers view. So when I do an inspect element, so this is how it looks like. Just zoom in a bit. Yeah, so it is a button class of button, type button, and then it has ARIA expanded is equal to false because, of course, it's quite eventual, right? It's not expanded and it will show as false. But when you open it, it turns out to be true. So this is how the ARIA attributes work under the hood in the DOM element, which will be perceived by the screen readers and eventually speak it out to the people who are using the assistive devices. So this is where we need those checks using WebDriver, and that is what exactly the test is doing. So this is an example. So I can run this test, but it will run quite fast, which we can't see. But I'm just showing it straight away over here, which is driver.find element, passing in this selector. I'm doing a key dot space, and so how it works is I'm hitting a refresh. So the focus is on customize view. So when I hit a space, so this is how it happens. So it expands. So that is where we are trying to work only with the keyboard functions like tab and space to make sure it's accessible. And that is what exactly the WebDriver code here does. So it does a space which activates the element, and we get an attribute ARIA expanded and making sure it's showing true, which is one use case to try out, which is one of the deep low-level tests that you can imagine. And also you can try to pass in an element and use Axe Builder to check for accessibility violations. So this test is using an Axe plugin that I will get onto it a little later. With that, let's go in with the usual flow, which is going to be the next one with the WebDriver plugins. So the examples that you saw before was all about using just your plain WebDriver test. And with these ideas, you can go back to your IDE and work on flows and ping back with any questions that you have, and we can discuss. So these are all tools that are available in the market to use that are free and open source. So there's an Axe Core, which is developed by DQ Systems. So they have a tool suite, right? So they're so passionate about accessibility, and they provide services. They also provide paid services too. And they have these neat open source tools for us to use, which has a JavaScript module for F1 testing, and also a plugin for WebDriver.js. So this slide shows demo of WebDriver.js, which is nothing but what we exactly saw. And as I was saying about Access having a tool of suite, so we just saw about, okay, let me try to run that. Let's get a little bit risky here. So there's a 3 test here: custom rule test, and remote URL test, and test.js. And here's a package.json which has those tests. So let me get on to my terminal and do a npm1 custom test. So which opens up a URL called DQ University demo. So this is a demo applications which is known to be accessibility prone website, where it is purposefully made so that you can practice. So there it is. So the test ran, and you can see the results are, of course, in a JSON format, which is just printed out on the console that you can refer. All the way up here. Okay, cool. Say, you can see here, so accessibility violations, so it has 11 accessibility violations. So this is how it looks. So it provides a description and a help, and also URL, and also an ID of that element where it found that accessibility defect. So at first you might not know what this is all about, but say for example, if you copy the description here, ensure buttons have discernible text. So let's go to Google and search for just this. And the first thing that you get is exactly from the DQ University, where they explain you what it's all about. So the buttons must have discernible text that clearly describes the destination, purpose, function, or actions for the screen reader users, and why this is important. And also they have how to fix a problem, so which might be easy for your developers to bring in a fix for the violation. And there are many violations like that, but you can refer that. So this is how the Axe plugin with JavaScript is helpful. So likewise, we have tools for different languages people use. I know people use different languages for testing, like Ruby. They have called gem Axe matches, and they are like Axe Selenium Java and Axe Selenium Python, tools like that to put in. And if your front end is Angular, we have Protractor accessibility plugin that you can use straight out of the box. And there's also something called tenon.io. They are a paid service where you can purchase a license and then put your tests, and it will just do an accessibility audit and bring it to you. And at unit test level, right? So what we saw so far is at integration test level, where we as a testers and automated testers would target doing accessibility testing. So at unit testing level, which is where developers would start bringing in the application parts at the unit testing level, they can use A11Y, which is nothing but npm install -- global A11Y. You can do that on your terminal, and you can install this plugin, and it's pretty straightforward to use that. And this is React A1Y, which is a neat plugin. So React.js is one technology that's booming up in the front-end world, overtaking Angular applications. So if your front-end is React.js, ask your developers to look through this React A11Y plugin that they can use. And as you see on the screenshot, straight away on the Chrome console log, it will print out the violations that you're doing when you straight on developing the components. And while we talk about React.js, we know React.js brings in the shadow DOM, right? So which makes things a little bit difficult, even for automation testers, to a certain level, where the development tags and all of the span tags, which are generated automatically from a component, be it a combo box, or be it a radio group, or be it a field set. So to explain more on shadow DOM, so shadow DOM provides encapsulation for DOM and CSS in a web component. So it makes things remain separate from the DOM of the main document. I hope that clears what Shadow DOM does. And so the Axe guys have come up with a new plugin called Axe Coconut that can be done with Chrome DevTools. And if you use Enzyme, which is from Airbnb, so it is a JavaScript testing utilities for React. So you can also test accessibility with a sample code snippet here. You can still use the A11Y helper, as you see in the import line on third line here. You can advise your developers to try using that and try to expect the results.violations length to be equal, which means that there is no violations returned back. And enough about the integration level and unit testing level, right? So let's talk about organization-wide, where you want to showcase accessibility testing at a company level. Say, for example, you have an hackathon within a company and you want to showcase something new that you've done. So this is something good we can show, right? So accessibility testing as a service. So I tried that on a past company, doing this on a hackathon which we had, which was a huge success, and everyone loved the idea. So you can use a Pally dashboard, which is again open source on GNU GPL license, so which means that you are allowed to share and modify the software, and it helps you to run accessibility testing as a service. So how that works is, so Pally dashboard has the it's a Node.js project, and it needs a MongoDB running as a daemon, and I set it up in a way that it runs on a Docker containers so that it's easy. People can run it straight out of the box. So this is how a high-level diagram would look like. So I have the code checkout. So the way that we set up is pretty straightforward. So all you have to do is clone the Pally dashboard project from the GitHub. And once you clone it, just do an npm install since it's a Node.js project, and then do an npm start, and that's it. So you would have something like this, that Pali dashboard is started and it's ready for use on localhost. Where we start. This is how it looks. So your automated testing, accessibility testing file. So you can go and add a new URL. Say, for example, my first test page. And I can do google.com. And you can select the standard here, whether you want to skim through section 508 or A or AA or AAA. So say, let's select AA. And there are also some rules that you want to ignore. Say you're at a development stage and you know that you're quite not ready to audit that specific rule, you can ignore that here, and you can click on add URL here. And then you can run Pali. So if you see on the terminal here, so Pali under the hood uses HTML sniffer to go audit, and it also uses Phantom.js to run the test in a headless mode. And now if you go to the homepage of the, you can see the results here. So this is where people get more excited, right? So they can just straight away hit the new URL, and they can enter the URL of the page that they want to test. And it just says 3 errors and 6 warnings usually people avoid. So you can just check whatever errors that it shows, and fix whatever is per your plan. So that's how the Pali dashboard can be useful. So of course the tools have good and bad, as we know. So the automated plugin scans a lot of code, which is also a good starting point for manual review. So the bad is that it has some false positives, so which might be quite surprising to see that the Google homepage has accessibility errors, which could be one of the false positives, which we might not know, but that people who actually develop the workflow make better decisions on what to do with that with errors. And with that, this link shows a nice list of common accessibility issues that are there. So you can use this checklist. You use this as a checklist and make sure when you design your test cases for accessibility, you can make sure these issues are covered and make sure those are all tested. Now the burning question. So how can I implement A119 strategy in my organization? So the thumb rules. No single person can ensure an app is successful on their own. And adopting accessibility mindset takes time organization-wide. And it's best to develop accessibility as a culture. So include in your job descriptions and ask for people who are passionate about accessibility, and which makes look nice company-wide too. And also the good tip is to involve people with disabilities early and understand the problem space, and design early, and thus you meet the business goals. And here are a few tips again. So establish an organization commitment with key stakeholders who are responsible for accessibility, and have a checklist or questionnaires that include accessibility for both new and existing apps. I know there are a lot of apps that will be developed and few are in future pipelines. So how would you go about that? And you can always prepare a checklist or questionnaire with those key stakeholders, and establish a benchmark, which is usually the AA standard. And also it starts from UX designers, right? So I would advise the UX designers of the companies to spearhead the user testing, which includes people with disabilities, and of course, ask the UI developers to include accessibility unit testing plugins that we just discussed, and of course, we testers can do the job with the automated fashion, or be it manual. And again, as the UX, it usually starts with GEL, right? A global expression language, where it is a single source of truth, providing everything you need to deliver a brand promises and create a consistent customer experience across the digital landscape with faster and with a wider range of devices, which doing that can avoid having color contrast issues, and you can bring an inclusive design ethos. And as we saw, so user testing is outside org is also advised. So you bring in people who can give feedbacks about the project. With that, these are some references that help me to learn about accessibility and implement, and that's where I was able to share the information with you here. And you can also go through to learn more. And with that, thanks for joining the session. Let's test and help build a web that's accessible for everyone. And also thanks Applitools and Source Labs for giving this opportunity. And I hope it was productive content that you all learned through, and there's a lot of key takeaways for you. With that, I'm open for any questions that you might have. Over to you, Eddie.
Yeah, we do have some questions. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I do.
Ah, perfect. Okay, so we are short for time, but we will take a couple of questions. So the first one is about the screen reader that you showed fairly in the beginning. So the question is, can't we just use Selenium to verify the header text on particular elements? Why do we need to have a screen reader?
Okay, yeah, so the screen readers interpret the way where how the headings and structures have been defined. We can do that through Selenium, but that is how the screen readers interpret the information, right? But we also need to make sure the screen readers speak how every element should be about. So I wish I could show a demo on how a voiceover would look like navigating through each element, but of course I can't do that now because it involves a speaker, and there's some technical challenges. But I would suggest you to try that out on your application, bringing up a voiceover, and it's much needed to see how an element is spoken. So one use case would be to test via screen readers. Say, for example, you might have a mandatory form elements on a page, right? Say, for example, a date of birth is a mandatory field. What happens if by mistake we press on a submit button? So eventually we would know there is a error mark showing in red or blue or whatever color code that you use, say that this is a mandatory field. But of course, the people who use screen readers might not know that, right? So that's the exact purpose that we want to test those elements, each element-wise, and also make sure that help text saying date of birth is a mandatory field is being read on the screen readers, not just on the screen. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, so I think we'll take one last one because we are out of time. So are multi-level drop-down menus a problem for accessibility? Should drop-down menus be limited to only one level?
One level? Can you repeat that, Adi? Sorry.
Sure, of course. Are multiple level drop-down menus are a problem for accessibility? Should drop-down menus be limited to only one level so they don't spear out into they don't channel out to more drop-down menus, to sub-menus?
Cool, I get that. That's a nice question, actually. So it's actually a best practice to maybe have at one level, but what you see these days in the applications that they develop, say for example React.js, right? So they have the Redux components which render those applications, right? So which will be a drop down with the select tag, and but if you see the select tag would have been hidden. So which means that eventually with WebDriver we can't use the select APIs, but we will have to actually click on the drop down and then read the elements and then click on whatever is there on the hierarchy. So that is how it looks. So which makes it a little difficult for the automation itself, right? So that's how the technology is advancing, and that is how they want to see. So that's where accessibility comes into picture, where they need to keep in mind. So it's not necessary to have a shiny drop down which looks neat under the hood, hiding a select tag. So with accessibility, again, as I explained, which brings in a little bit of problem, right? So even though if you have a drop down with multiple lists, so there are few other components that come up. Say for example, you have like an input tag where you start typing in, and based on that it starts populating the results. So that is also a good way to use. And the plugins that we have that we discussed so far will nicely pick up those errors as well. Yep, I hope that answers.
Great. So unfortunately, we are out of time for today's session. I see all the questions that you are posting at the moment, and I promise to send them over to Manoj and his team so they can pick it up after the session in the next couple of days. I want to thank everyone that took the time and joined us for this live session today. And of course, I want to thank Manoj for this in-depth and hands-on session. Thank you very much. You got a lot of compliments. I will send them to you after the session as well. And of course, I hope to see all of you at our next event.
Sure. Thanks, Adi.